Thanks, Callan. We have an absolutely terrific panel here, and I'd already started having a bit of a conversation with Andrew from ANZ and realised that I was probably asking him all the same questions that all of you want to hear as well, so I stopped. But we have Andrew Baird, who is an operations expert from ANZ, Sahida Frawley, who's the head of digital business services from SAP, Kirsty Richards, the program leader in autism and agriculture from SnPork Farms, Daniel Barr, who's our head of identity and access management at NAB, and Michael Fieldhouse, social impact leader from DXC Technology. So I might start just by getting each of you to introduce yourselves a little bit, and if you can share with everybody some of the good work that your organisation's been doing. Andrew, might kick off with you. Thanks.
Great. So I'm Andrew Baird. So I'm from ANZ. I've been there for, gasp for breath, 32 years. So done probably about 10 significant different jobs in that time. So probably changing every 3 years, but in one organisation, which is quite an amazing feat these days. More recently, we've been involved with the Spectrum program for autistic employment, which has been wonderful to see the individuals grow and develop, some of them changing their lives forever, in fact, like moving out of home and all that sort of stuff. So it's really great to see.
Thanks, Andrew. Sahida.
Thanks, Andrew. Sahida Frawley from SAP. SAP has been on the journey since 2013. I, myself, and Australia has been on the journey since 2016. So for me, I headed up, at the time, our public sector services and support team and did a little bit of internal agitation as why couldn't we do something in Australia and New Zealand? Why were we only doing it globally? And now have the privilege of sitting on the ANZ executive and being the executive sponsor for SAP at ANZ for Autism at Work.
Hi everyone, my name's Kirsty Richards. I am actually a veterinarian by background, so this is definitely a totally different area to be working in for me. I work for SnPork Farms. We farm just over 500,000 animals across Australia and New Zealand, and that represents about 15% of Australian pork production. Late in 2016, we embarked in collaboration with the Autism CRC and Specialistern on an autism employment program that we call Autism and Agriculture. We now employ 12 autistic people in animal care roles across our sites in South Australia and Queensland. And in doing this, we're recognising the strengths that some autistic people have in caring for animals.
Thank you. So Daniel Barr, Head of Identity and Access Management at NAB. So we're relatively early on our journey as part of the Dandelion program. We've got 6 neurodiverse team members that have been with us since the back end of May. We've also got 2 fantastic helpers that are with us on that journey as well. And our team members are working across a variety of areas as it relates to identity and access management. So fulfillment, controls, automation, coding and development, things of that nature. And we put some quotes up at the start of the day and also talked about 23% efficiency uplift. So we're already reaping the benefits and we're the best part of 10 weeks in, right? So you can only imagine what it's going to look like in a couple more months and a couple more years. So I'm really excited to be here and happy to sort of talk through that journey with you.
Thank you. Michael Fieldhouse, Social Impact Leader for DXC, but started the Dandelion program in 2013. We now have over 100 plus autistic people in the program and also have given over 70 plus people work experience as well as part of our collaborations through the neurodiversity hubs.
Thank you. Michael, might just stay with you for a minute. What differences have you seen in the take-up from the employers during the time that you've been with DXC?
Yeah, so I think Australia was lagging a little bit compared to the rest of the world. The US, I think, started probably a lot earlier in some of the ideology. I think, but we've actually caught up in our regards to having more sustainable models. I think that's one thing we've actually kind of been very good at. But I think, uptake now, more people are talking about neurodiversity. You've got, if we had Dr. Lawrence Fong, who's actually, you've got #1 university in the world. They've got something around neurodiversity, so will that make a change? We've got Cornell University, that have got the Institute of Disability Employment with Professor Suzanne Brer. So there's kind of messages coming down from leading universities now filtering into our universities as well, which is going to, I think, make a difference.
Great, thank you. Daniel, why did NAB decide to embark upon this neurodiversity challenge?
So good question, and we, I think, highlighted it a little bit earlier on. So there's been certain individuals along this journey that have been really instrumental in driving this through, Katrina yourself, and I am going to point her out, even though I said I wouldn't. So Tracy, stand up, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
That's all right. So that's one of the main reasons, right? So Tracy Edwards has been fundamental in driving this through from a NAB standpoint. We've been on the journey for a little while, trying to get this program implemented. David Fairman, who's our new Chief Security Officer, has been there roughly about 12 months, has been instrumental as well in terms of driving this through from a senior management standpoint. So getting buy-in at that level as well. And then when Tracy brought it to the management team and said, look, this is what we're looking at doing, do we have some areas we think would be open to a program of this nature? My hand was up in a second, right? Because the opportunity to introduce some diversity as it relates to neurodiversity, cultural diversity, gender diversity, we're always looking for how we can improve as a broader team, right? And the respective skills that different individuals bring. So for us, it was a bit of a no-brainer. As I said, we've only been on this journey since May, so it's relatively new for us. But it's been something that we've been pretty passionate about in terms of putting the right structures in place, the right models in place, the right support structures around the individuals coming into the bank, so that we can make this a sustainable long-term benefit, not just for us, but the individuals themselves.
Thanks, Daniel. Kirsty, I might ask the same question of you. Why did SnPork decide to enter into looking for a neurodiverse population in your organisation?
Ours is it comes back a little bit more to workforce logistics. We work in agriculture. There's a huge shortage of qualified, competent people. And we suffer a big drain whenever mining gets good, farming loses all of our good employees. And we're concentrated sort of Darling Downs in Queensland and sort of both north and south of Adelaide. So when mining does get good, that is exactly what happens. So we have that challenge from an agricultural perspective, and we could see that in the autism community there's a real challenge in terms of unemployment and underemployment, and for us there is a great compatibility between what we needed and what the autism community had to offer.
Great, thanks. Sahida, SEP's been on that journey for a bit longer than some of the other employers, yes. NAB, on the panel. How has the introduction of neurodiversity affected or influenced your organisation?
Okay, so yes, SAP has been on the journey for a while, and I think very much, and I think many of us sit back in workplaces and we talk about diversity and inclusion, and SAP we use the term differently abled. And for me that was a key message of, and it was interesting listening to this morning as well, of looking at the strengths that you're perceiving and certainly looking at what could we do in that space. SAP with others have done a lot of research globally that diversity actually breeds your innovation, your collaboration, your productivity. And certainly in ANZ as a leadership team, it was also, okay, what are we going to do? And I think, and I like that you called out certain individuals, because it does take individuals in your organisation who are brave enough to stick up their hands and sponsor the idea, because everybody says, yeah, it's a great thing, we need to be doing it. But who's going to take that first step to not just say we should do it, but own it and move it forward? And I think that's the key part of success. Where with SAP, for those that have a voice. And for me, it was exposure to others. I have friends with children on the spectrum, others that I'd previously worked with, and saw the talent and the potential. And it was, why can't we do something? And I think what everybody will find is you will find. And for me, at the time, my executive sponsor was my boss, who sat on the executive of SAP, and he said, okay, well, tell me what we need to do. And I think everybody's got to be brave enough within your workplace to go ask that, because there is a lot of science that you can pull on to actually prove that it's a good thing for your workplace. Then it comes down to many individuals to want to drive it. So that really was, it is a drive within SAP of how we can be better. And for many of us, this is a key part of how can we be a better organisation, better employer, better group of people to work with. I think, and many this morning spoke about at the executive breakfast, what it brings to your workplace, actually. So it's not just what we do for the individuals, but what does it bring to your workplace, that I think is a really key part of this.
Thank you.
And certainly with my global colleagues, I spent a lot of time speaking to my global colleagues before I convinced people here. That was the message that was very loud and clear of the impact that had.
Thank you. Andrew, ANZ also has been on this journey for longer than some of us. How has that impacted your organisation?
Look, incredibly, we've been on the journey. I think we launched 2017. Matt, who's also in the room for a bit of a shout out, who was a pioneer in our early days, was launching the program. Diverse talent is what we want. We also are looking to, there's vast rates of attrition in certain areas. In technology, there's lots of competition for young talent and diverse talent. So we're looking at ways to counteract some of that. And this is definitely an untapped pool, largely untapped, less so these days, for that talent. So that's really changing that. And the teams that the individuals start to work in really understand that, and they can see the benefits. And like NAB are seeing with 23% increases, we're also seeing great increases in productivity. The vast amount of training that they consume and work product that they consume is incredible, what you see. So the productivity, yes, increases. Executive buy-in, fully supportive executive board and team members. So.
Maybe ask a question of all of you. What advice do you have for employers who are considering transitioning to the neurodiverse workforce?
I'll start. I would say, as we said this morning, just do it, give it a go. You don't know what you don't know. Everyone is different. The neurodiverse workforce has immense talent. And yes, we represent ANZ for tech. That's where our program currently sits. We would love to expand that more broadly. Obviously, you've got SnPork here, it's non-tech. So there's lots of abilities that they have.
I'd agree, just do it, absolutely, just do it. And we've got individuals who are part of our project management office, individuals who are part of our development team in New Zealand at the moment. Globally, all sorts of roles, legal, financials, so across the spectrum, across the business spectrum of all the different roles that we have. The learning, I think everybody gravitates to, of course, you're going to train the managers who are, the day-to-day managers of these individuals. You need to put structure in place for them. I think probably the biggest learning as we reflected on what had been successful in some of our offices versus others. In our smaller offices, the Canberra office where I have one graduate and an intern, with that entire office at the time, 3 years ago, that office was about 50 people. We did, not just with the managers, but with the induction of the whole office, basically a learning. And it was a learning in communications. It wasn't just a learning about, hey, we've got people on the spectrum coming into the office. And it was follow-up learning. So I think where we've done that, it has been far more successful because, quite frankly, it's been an enabler from a HR, a better manager, better community, better workforce, better, co-worker perspective. That's probably the learning. And the offices where we didn't do that because we thought they were too large, those are the ones where we sort of struggled a little bit more to find the right home and the right fit, and we didn't have as much of that organisational impact.
Firstly, I totally agree with everything you just said. Awareness across the business is, I can't underestimate how important it is. Underemphasise. For us, though, it's really been about shifting the paradigm from thinking about positions to thinking about people. So if you can do that, then all it is about working out how to employ a person. And if you can start thinking that way, the rest becomes easy. What do I need to do to make it easy for this person to apply for my job, to get my job, and to keep my job? And then you just work out what the job might comprise later. And we never thought we'd be able to do it because our jobs are very structured, but it isn't actually that hard once you start thinking about it. The other piece of advice I would give to employees is you need to have support top down. You need to have your executive on board. There's big decisions in terms of company culture and company protocols, how it all works, that need to be made, and you need to have that commitment. But equally, you need ground up. You need every single person on the ground engaged and aware and committed, because at the end of the day, these are the people that your autistic employees are working side by side every day, and these are the people that enable their day-to-day lives.
Pretty much exactly the same. So echo a lot of the same comments there. We tried to ensure that anyone in the immediate team did mandatory training as a default. Anyone within the next sort of layer of that respective ecosystem was offered training as well, and we had a really strong uptake of that too. And then just broader general awareness training as well for managers that may only have a light touch, but still just to be aware of what the program was, what we were doing, interactions, how they could be best positioned to assist as well. So again, driven, top down, bottom up across the board. And the other thing we did as part of the hiring process was trying to ensure that we placed people with skills and abilities in the areas that they would thrive, right? So if they were strong programmers, that's where we would put them. If they were great from a data analyst standpoint, that's where we would put them to try and make that transition as easy as possible, yeah? So as we're going along now, we're continuing to monitor type of work they enjoy doing, where do they thrive, how do they thrive, what does the environment look like that they work best in, and tailor that accordingly, yeah? So constant dialogue with the team on the ground and the team that is helping facilitate the program as well. So it doesn't just stop the day they arrive, it's a continuous piece as you go.
Thanks. I'll just probably add on something from my experience just coming back from the US, talking to a number of employers. Is actually also setting clear expectations, but if you're going to establish a program or hiring initiative, so what's actually in the program? So being very clear in regards to for individuals applying, so are you providing support, not providing support, and also very clear expectations for the management and the co-workers to understanding what they're getting in support. So everyone knows that there's if you are not providing any support, if that's the actual decision, that's very clear in the actual decision making.
Thank you. And a couple of you have touched on this a little bit, but are there any challenges that you've experienced and how have you been overcoming them?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges we've had is actually the understanding the difference between autism and mental health. So that was our biggest epiphany when we first started the program. So we had to reinvent a lot of the mental health support networks we had. So there are obviously some stats that, and I say it's the elephant in the room. That 80% of people with that have autism have a comorbidity. And that's something to be not afraid of, but it's just to know. And we've actually got better mental health support now by knowing that. And that's actually has provided managers getting better understanding how to provide mental health support for people that are non-autistic. So it's actually been that was an opportunity rather than a challenge.
And I love that, turning the challenge into an opportunity and actually using that as an opportunity to get better mental health understanding as well.
It was absolutely epiphany to a lot of our managers and team leaders. They've now learned a whole bunch of new skills that are just going to be helping them for their future careers in management.
Great, thank you. Dan, not sure if it's too early for you to have any challenges, but any that you're seeing at the moment?
My biggest challenge has been finding enough desks, to be honest, right, for our new staff members. If you work at NAB, you'll feel me on that. So not particularly. The thing I would say is we have Karen and Aidan that are embedded within our team that are support staff dedicated to this program, and that's been fantastic, right? So assisting us with understanding where there may be challenges, how we can best assist with that, sort of helping to bridge the gap where required. So it's almost like that constant training and assisting the staff and myself as required. But from my standpoint, it's going fantastically so far.
Good. Kirsty, any challenges?
Yeah, so we're almost 3 years down the track with our first employees. We've encountered lots of challenges. That's not to say they're bad things. We've learnt from them all, and I would totally agree we've improved our systems. As one example, we have just employed a social worker full-time. Now, for that to happen in agriculture is massive. I'm not aware of any precedent for that worldwide, and we are setting a new goal point for the sector. If I could break our challenges up inside the workplace, it almost always comes back to autism awareness. It's people forgetting, or it's people being too busy, people having other priorities on, and they just forget. They just, they just lapse. In terms of autism awareness, we've delivered awareness training to, I'd say, in excess of 600 staff, and we're doing that again and again. This Monday and Tuesday of this week, just past, we have started again in South Australia. So we've gone back to square one and started with basic autism awareness and then some extension strategies in the workplace. We don't differentiate between mentors and managers and people with less reach or less touch, as you mentioned before. Everyone gets the same training. Outside the workplace, a big eye-opener for us has been the lack of support for individuals to maintain employment. There's a lot of support for people to get work. There's not an awful lot of support for people to stay in work. And by that support, I'm talking about the lifestyle factors. It's shopping, it's cooking food, it's setting up a routine at home, it's cleanliness in the house, it's working out how you're going to make some friends. If you're living in a new town, what opportunities are there for you? And that's, as an employer, that's difficult for us to address because it's outside our remit. But at the same time, what happens outside work really translates into productivity inside the workplace. So we have made it our problem, and we are extending our support to that area of their lives.
That's terrific.
So we've been doing it for 3 years. For me, it was interesting when I compared some of the other experiences where we had done, 3 in one office, in the Canberra office, 4 in New Zealand. In our Sydney office, we had 3 autism interns, but they were all in different parts of our business, so they weren't all part of the same pod or the same team. That certainly, I think, of having more of a team nature to the introduction, I think provides more strength, or at least a pairing, than one individual in a pod who is the new person who is on the spectrum as well. I think a lesson for us is that's probably far more challenging. Those individuals certainly learnt and gained a lot out of that, but we probably haven't had that same connection and success with those individuals. One of the learnings, because it has been going for 3 years, where you hope that, or we have this view that you've got to make sure that you offer them a full-time permanent job at the end, as we had a couple of interns. And we were fortunate enough to have one of our interns in Canberra who loved her job, almost gave up uni at one point to come and join us, and then realised that actually she was studying political sciences. That was her passion. And she almost felt guilty to come and have a chat to me that she'd been offered a job. We had assisted her and she got an internship to work in the US for a period of time, and after coming back from that, she got an offer in a minister's office, and she was torn because it was, you've done so much for me, and how do I? And it was like, absolutely, go fly, So I think, but there are a lot of people in our office who are doing that, but we've invested so much time and effort. Well, you do that with lots of people. So that's a learning of maybe, you've also got to reflect on what you've done for them in their career. Because not everybody stays in the same job forever. Is also just as important as whether they're with you in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 4 years' time. Where have they actually gone to next, I think, was a great reflection and learning for us as well.
Thank you. Andrew?
I think the main challenges for us similarly is awareness training across the organisation. So we have an online training which we get email out and get people to do. We'd like uptake to be greater on that. So I think we do training with Meredith, our ASC, who's here, face to face with the teams that the individuals are going to interact more with, and that goes down really well. But it's making it wider to the organisation, and it's how we do that. And ANZ is global, so there's lots of contact with India, the Philippines, and China as well. Just not just in Australia, and of course across all states. And New Zealand. Get New Zealand. So I think that's one of our main challenges. The other one is we have some autistic people coming through the door, not through our Spectrum program. So we have a graduate who's autistic. He has certain challenges, and we're just having to work out how we can help him as part of our program. So we can't not help him because we have a program that supports autistic people, but he's not part of the program. So that's one of our challenges that we're working through. And we do have some other autistic people who are now in the organisation and calling out for a little bit of help. So it's how we manage that.
And so just want to pick up on that bit a little more. So in terms of success for people on the spectrum, do you feel that it's better to be part of the programme, or are you trying to push the message out more to the broader community so that there's no need for programme?
I think the ultimate game is that there is no program and that people just come through the door and they are supported of what needs to be supported for them. Yes, this grad may benefit from being on the program, but he's not, so we need to provide that support as needed. But yeah, ultimately we don't want to have a program. We want to change our processes so that people just come through and continue to come through as they do.
Yeah, thank you. Before you embarked upon this, was there any opposition to setting up a programme? And if so, how did you get through that?
I actually don't think we had any real opposition to the program. Like, there's always the number figure that always comes around for business cases and things like that. But we approached our Chief Information Security Officer, Linwin, similarly to NAB with their exec in cyber, and it was a conversation over a cup of tea. Linwin loves a cup of tea, and it was a yes from that 30-minute conversation, and then Matt and I approached the executive tech board. And it was just the right thing to do. I think half of them were almost in tears about what we wanted to do. They just understood.
Fantastic.
I can speak to that one if you want. Jay here from Specialist Stern might remember this scenario. We had quite staunch opposition from a management level. A member of our team who was actually the production manager at one of our piggeries, and he was and now is employing a number of autistic people. He had personal experience with autism that led him to believe that it was never going to be compatible in any workplace, and that in our particular scenario that it posed significant work health and safety concerns. So they were quite legitimate concerns. What we did, and we continue to do this, is we engaged with him, we listened to him. We took his concerns very seriously, and we gave him an opportunity to have his input. What do you want to do? How do you think we could manage this? And he is now one of our biggest proponents. Like, will not let you get near our autistic employees if he thinks you're going to do anything that he doesn't want done. And he'll turn up with marshmallow biscuits, and he just, he'll be the one that's going to help them if they've locked themselves out of a house. So you guys need to bear in mind our communities, our guys are living in rural communities. If things happen, they need to rely on the people around them. You don't necessarily have the services available you do in the city. So this particular manager, who I vividly recall this will not work, is the guy who's going out at 11 o'clock at night to help someone break into their own house, quite happily. So I'd say it's about engagement, it's about validating their concerns, and it's about giving them some control over what's happening.
Great. That sounds like quite active opposition. Was there any passive opposition when you started going through the programme that perhaps you hadn't realised was there?
I would say no, because everyone was involved in autism awareness, and that came up in the first instance. It was largely due to ignorance. People had never had any experience of autism. They'd never met an autistic, or never knowingly met an autistic person. As soon as you move through that, and as soon as they met our trainees, so our trainees spend 2 weeks working on farm, and they're actually in the farm scenario, so they're exposed on a day-to-day basis to all of our employees. It just melts. The perceived hurdle is not a hurdle once there's that awareness and interaction.
Excellent.
I would describe, it's funny, I think when you talk about it, and my description would be, of course, no one's going to say, of course, you shouldn't do that. You know, everybody in a leadership position is going to say, absolutely, it's the right thing to do. We should be looking at creating a more diverse workplace, and those that are differently able should be part of that workplace. I think the unconscious bias for me comes, and SAP has not stood it up, locally or globally, as a series of headcount that are granted to you to go do this program. So they are existing headcount out of the business. So someone is clearly saying, this is a role that I'm going to hire. I'm not going to hire anybody else. It's not a +1 to actually take on someone who is on the spectrum. I would describe it as SAP, and I think it's a challenge for all of us if you actually ask people to give up a headcount that they had, not they were being granted an extra. I think there's still an unconscious bias because people do that, but I need that job filled, and maybe that person couldn't do that job as well as someone else I could hire. And this is why I do love the conversation around the strengths that they bring. So what are you actually looking for in the team, and why are you hiring that particular individual? What strengths are they going to bring that someone who may not be neurodiverse bring to your team? So actually challenging that lens, because within SAP it is the challenge of you are saying one of the headcount, you know, because there's not a +1 of I'm deliberately making that decision to make sure that the workload that I've got is going to be done by that team in that role. So I think there is still for us, and we have 6 roles at the moment in ANZ to continue to challenge our business to give up roles and headcount to be part of the program.
I think just to add on one of the challenges that we had was probably more passive in regards to, was more dealing with change. Obviously, IT companies now more like financial services organisations. We're constantly keeping up with technology shifts, restructures. How are they going to cope with change? And that was one of the major discussion points we had, was just dealing with how would that work and how would managers, especially when you work in a very fluid international market, these things just, before you know it, you now need more cyber people. Now we need more data analytics people, or now we're moving testing to Philippines. It all kind of all happens within a moment, and so that was a big intellectual discussion within the corporation.
Daniel, any passive resistance or?
No, not really. We're a big bank, and it's the mechanics of getting this through the system, right? Which, from not a resistance standpoint, but just a process can delay it, right? And that's why you do need individuals that are really sort of championing the effort, yeah? I think we mentioned we've been on this journey for a couple of years, but we've only just landed the team members through the door, right? So I don't think that's a conscious bias towards neurodiverse people. It's just the mechanics of how this would work in a large organisation. But I think being able to demonstrate the benefits we get and whether we're using headcount or not on such programs and individuals will only hasten that, right? So when we go in and have a conversation with other parts of the organisation now, and we talk to the efficiency gains, the productivity uplift, the simplification that we're achieving, that won't happen, right? So I think as we continue to have these sort of conversations, as events like this, I would encourage anyone that's thinking of doing this, if you're finding resistors where you can, to bring them to an event like this. I don't know how you could resist it. after seeing, the conversations we've had today, the evidence that's being produced through the respective research institutes, that this is only going to become more compelling as we go, right? So, no, we haven't really encountered too much passive or otherwise resistance.
Great, thank you. I'll ask one more question and then we'll maybe throw to the floor for, I'm sure you all have lots of questions out there. What are your organisation's plans for the future for building neurodiverse workforces, Michael?
One of our biggest probably focuses at the moment is our collaboration with the Israeli Defence Forces. But we've got the oldest program on the globe. They recruit about 120 autistic people a year. So knowing how to do it to scale and management. So they're things we're learning how to do and actually how to support them. So that was probably one of the things we've got permission from the Department of Defence about 3 years ago to have that collaboration, very kindly, thanks, Lindsay. And we then went through obviously converting some of those tools that we do use in the program from Hebrew to English and revalidating them. And we're very much focused on in getting some of those we've got a lot more human resource management tools focused for autistic people. So we're really going to be kind of doubling down on that.
Fantastic.
So from our side, it'd just be continue to leverage what we've started within my function across the broader NAB, right? And where we can look for opportunities to impact the business in positive ways, potentially not just from a tech standpoint, but a broader business context as well. So really it's how do we take this onwards and upwards from what we've achieved to date?
Great. Kirsty?
So two perspectives for SnPork. From a neurodiverse perspective, onward and upward, we see no barriers to continuing to employ autistic people. We have 10% of two of our farms' workforces currently on the spectrum, and we don't notice it other than we get some great innovations happening, just different ways of thinking about the same old things. From a business perspective, that's the bigger challenge for us. It's driving the deep cultural change around what is fundamentally best practice for everyone. That's, I think, the bigger challenge for us is all of the deep level change to things like how we recruit people, how we induct people, what sort of support we have in the workplace, all of that's the bigger challenge for us, but that's something we're totally committed to because we know we can't drive our autism program forward without doing that.
For us at SAP and ANZ, I think it is to expand what we've done. So we've got two key locations that I think are growing and thriving, and getting that across all of our business and all of our offices and make greater penetration in that. So it is expanding it further to where we are today.
Thanks. Yes, absolutely. Expansion. We'd love to take it outside of tech at ANZ. It's how we do that. The way that we do it would make sense. But also we're looking to grow our early talent pipeline as well. So that's part of Spectrum. It's our grads and interns and return to work program and stuff as well. So it's a large endeavour.
Thank you. What questions do you have?
Just for the organisations that are way down the line and have been doing the programs for some time, just wondering, do the people that have come through your programs, the neurodiverse people, do they have any input into what it looks like, what it feels like, to help it be more successful?
I think we're open to that. It's not something we've proactively done. Like, we get feedback from the individuals on what's working well and what isn't. But certainly it's something we can certainly consider. The groups that we have are quite social, and I'm sure they would welcome the opportunity to provide that. There are a couple of people in our recent cohort where we've asked them to be engaged in some other activities in ANZ in helping out in other areas, and they've put their hand up and quite happy to participate in doing that as well.
Michael?
Yeah, we go through our formal review every year with the program, with all the people in the all the participants. As it's at different stages, it's actually quite good. So now we're almost 6 years in, you get a 6-year snapshot. We also balance that with we've got evidence-based research underneath the program. So we do get into those. It's done by La Trobe. So Dr. Darren Henley, where are you? He's not here, no, from La Trobe. So if you want to actually talk to him, there's a lot of evidence base around it. That gives us a very independent look at what's going on, which is quite important. This was talking a little bit about the mental health that came up in our first snapshot. Surprised us when we first were doing it, because when we first looked at, none of the service providers actually understood it. So this gave us a kind of an idea about how we had to double down on it, and what are some of the issues we had to actually deal with, and we had to improve, like first aid and mental health training for our managers.
I've got a question over here.
I'm Ken Baker from the National Disability Insurance Agency, and congratulations to all of you for doing what you're doing. So my question is about the role of government. Do you think government should have a role in assisting what you're doing? If government does have a role, if they can assist, if government could assist, what would you like government to do, or maybe stop doing?
I made a submission to the NDIS last week on behalf of SnPork. Our biggest challenge, well, there's two with NDIS, or sorry, I'm not very fluent in NDIS and DIA. But our biggest challenges are twofold. One is we find our employees actually often end up with reduced entitlements upon gaining work. There seems to be a perception that having a job means you have lower support requirements, and I'd argue that it's exactly the reverse. Maintaining a job requires different supports, but support nevertheless. The other challenge we see is the lack of support for employers. So everything, I think if you support employers, then by extension you can support more employees. You get a greater scale of value. So you could support one individual and that one individual reaps some benefits. You could support one employer and you may have employment opportunities and support for 10, 20, 100, 1,000 employees. So I think there's a lot of value to be gained out of engaging with employers and finding out what we need to do what we do better, because in SnPork's example, we are these days entirely self-funded.
Add to that, I think I echo a lot of the comments there. I think it's also what we find is that the events after work is kind of grey line between work and life is probably it definitely is a grey line, and so an event can happen at home, and before you know it, it's spilling into the workplace. And it's actually kind of understanding those things and what support does an employer actually have to play, and what does the government provide. And one of the things from talking to all our employees and all people in the program, it's some of these mental health support networks, which is kind of critical as part of it. It's not just the autism support, it's also the kind of life skill support as well.
You guys come from organisations with pretty significant resources. If I can give you a hypothetical, if you were to be part of a significantly smaller organisation, example would be a regional accounting firm, for example, what would be the first few things that you would do, and how would you implement a program for hiring neurodiverse individuals with a small organisation?
Daniel, do you want to have a go?
I can start. So I think a lot of the lessons learned, even though we're a fairly large organisation, can be applied on a smaller scale, right? So, my team, we're 100 plus individuals, but where we've placed the team members is in a team of 20 to start, yeah? And we've almost ring-fenced that team to go, okay, from a training, from integration, from a, awareness standpoint, we're going to run you almost independently, yeah? So the level of training that we apply to that cohort is fairly significant. The level of oversight and monitoring we have is fairly significant. the level of reporting and dialogue that we have is continuous in nature. So I don't think you need to have, 35,000 employees in order to build a pretty robust, mature program in order to do it. I would just say, just scale it down accordingly, right? So if you've got a workforce of 100, then have a look at the level of training you think is going to be required across that organisation. What support structures are you putting in place? Who are going to be the individuals working closely with neurodiverse staff members, and how can they best be supported going forward? So I think there are, irrespective of your size, there are lessons that can be learned across the board.
Great. I think we've got
Hi, yes.
a question here.
I'm also from NAB, so I'm keen to talk about how you might like to take this more broadly. I work in the corporate and institutional bank, so very different from where you are, but still really interested in understanding. My question is a little bit to Kirsty's point about don't hire for a role, hire a person. And my question is, to what extent have you had to redesign roles that exist, because that comes to the FTE question, doesn't it? To what extent have you had to redesign roles so that you can suit the skill set?
It's probably not so much about redesigning roles as having flexibility within those roles. So the part-time, full-time scenario is one to think about. All of our employees start part-time and they build up to full-time based on their individual capabilities. So I guess it's starting to think about individuals as individuals. So if you had 4 people start, one might take a month to go full-time, another might take a year. And someone else may never go full-time, they might go 4 days a week. So there's been we've certainly flexed a lot in that area, and it's great for us because traditionally jobs in agriculture are full-time or they're not there at all. So you start thinking about other potential workforces within your community, say for example mothers of children who could come out and do part-time work. So you open up that opportunity by virtue of what you're doing within the autism program. Within the jobs itself, it was mentioned earlier about identifying people's interests and strengths and giving them more opportunities to follow that. And as a business, SnPork does that generally, so it hasn't been a difficult transition for us to make to extend that to our autistic employees. If people are interested, we run an RTO. So there's opportunities for people to extend and learn in areas of special interest, and we just try and help people identify them and support them to follow those interests.
I'm just wondering, we talk a lot about neurodiverse strengths, but in the hiring process and in the performance evaluation process, there's often a checklist of strengths, a checklist of capabilities that we assess people by. How have you gone about managing that process with your HR departments and prioritising the strengths as opposed to prioritising the weaknesses?
Sahida might.
Yeah, I can touch on that one. Because I was going to say, as part of the program, before we even went through a selection process to find candidates, we literally sat down with our HR department and looked at the types of jobs we were looking to fill, and literally in the job profile looked at the strengths that we were looking for, as you would with any employee, quite frankly, of what am I looking for, but also then looking with the assistance that we got externally of what were those strengths that might match someone who is neurodiverse. So we literally did because not everybody ticks every box in every job profile, and you will have strengths and weaknesses, and you always make that balance. So, but we literally looked through types of jobs where certain strengths were beneficial to those jobs, and those were the jobs that we initially targeted as part of our program. And it was a deliberate, we wanted the program to be successful, so it was very much, let's look at where in the business we would start and what types of jobs we would start with.
Great. I think we've got a question down here.
Just a wonderful conference. I can say something about NDIS, DSP, TPD, try and get it all in one line. I had a lot of interest a long time ago with a certain technology, electronics, computers, that sort of stuff, right? Transitioned, and I now find that some of the stuff that I couldn't cope with was what we've been talking about, and I was in and out of the job market and so on, right? So you land into Centrelink, and then Centrelink recognises, oh, okay, you might not be good if there's a DES part, okay, DES, And then they supposedly have staff, and I've been connected with a group. And when I first started, more than 77 months ago, because or weeks ago, that's because there's a tick box at that level. They've suddenly got they've got psychologists and all these people, and I applied for an NDIS, and it's been knocked back, but the rejection form is almost better than the application form, the first application form, because at least it tells you what you didn't get. Yeah. So they sent me a new form, and I've got it in here, right? And it's brilliant because it actually gives, a lot of separated qualities, and So I'm trying to get my NDIS assistant helper, I'm trying not to mention too many names. She says, let's organise a meeting with your doctor, right, to go along. But my doctor has, on several occasions, when he tried to fill in this form before, said, oh, you're fine, right? And I say, okay, I can work on certain things. And on a good day, I go in for something else, like statins or something. You go in and say, okay. And he says, oh, you look fine. I said, well, you should see me 2 hours before and 2 hours after, right? And my partner comes to help me to get the food because it's on there, but because I can't organise to put it together, right? I've got lots of donated food and all that sort of stuff. So that you've answered all this. It's wonderful stuff. So I sometimes think if I could get a bit of help to do some of the things, and it sounds like you're being a little teenage boy, right? Well, maybe, yeah. Certain things you can't do. You really can't organise certain things. It takes me ages in the shower, to do that. So I've avoided that sometimes. But if you can get above that, you feel as if you could work, yeah. But then the doctor says, "Oh, could you do this all week?" And I think, maybe a couple of days. And I go to a lot of tech meetings with new program languages and computer languages and stuff, tech things, right? And they say, "Oh, you can do this." And I mention, secretly autism. They say, "Oh, it doesn't matter," but I don't think they know what it is. So and I have to make the first move. And for me to make the phone call, I've paced backwards and forwards and organised a rat run in the carpet, backwards and forwards, before I actually get to something. And then sometimes they're really good and they say, okay, fine. And I can talk then for hours, and I'm bored them to death. And I still don't know what they wanted to know, and they don't either. So the new application form, look, I've gone on too long. This is me. The new application form, I'm sort of a bit nervous. Do I get my... I had a really good doctor and he's left. Do I get my alternative one who sometimes thinks I'm really good? Or do I get a separate one that can look at the feet, look at the notes and say, right, he's got this, because the new form is really good. Thank you very much for the guy over there, right? The NDIS person. The new form is better than the last form I had. And I think, oh, there's a chance it asked me different questions. We want direct answers. Do you want a cup of coffee? Yes, right, coffee over there, right. Do you feel like a drink? Oh, do you know how a bit thirsty? That doesn't work with us, mostly. You want to be direct?
Thank you. I think there's... one of the things that I want to pick out from there is that kind of direct feedback, particularly early on, and from an employer perspective. What is it that we are looking at, and thinking about how we articulate that in a different way. So, Michael, could you maybe speak about that?
I think one of the things we've learned is actually, when you're actually looking at work profiles then to jobs, is actually look at tasks. What tasks need to be done? Then looking at what skill sets are needed for those tasks. And then moving away from this idea of a job description, which is, if we all know that, you go down at, I'll go down and look at, I do 70%, the other 30% I can't do. Oh, bullshit, that'd be fine. But, that's kind of what we look at. But maybe that's my personality. But the key part is that we moved that away and actually moved to more narratives. So what does the job entail? What does a day in the life look like? And that's, I think, more important. And then we found that was actually very more applicable to gender. It was quite interesting that we had a lot more females actually associating with what a day in the life was. So that was, I think, about when you're looking at reform of your processes, that's one thing, it needs to be considered.
That's great. Thank you. I'm sorry, we've run out of time. Didn't think we were going to get to run out of time, but we have run out of time. I want to say an enormous thank you to all of our panellists, not just for being here today, but for all of the wonderful work that you've been doing in driving greater understanding and opportunities for diverse workforces. Just a couple of things that really resonated and themes that were coming through from there. The absolute need for leadership and for leaders to be on board with this, and a reliance upon the lone fool in the hill, those individuals who just never ever give up. The benefits of this are clearly much, much broader than just for the participants and for neurodiverse people. It's, you know, whether it's mental health, anything else, it's just the benefits are great and social. The challenges that I heard had absolutely nothing to do with neurodiverse people. They were all to do with everybody else. And so recognising that that's actually where the challenge lies, I think is really important. The need for us to build things for the person rather than for a role. And the last message that I heard come through loud and clear is just do it. Just go and do it. So thank you, everybody.